Hey guys, Saf here with another Raid Shadow Legends video. Hope you're doing well today and you are grinding along if you're doing the fusion. I just want to do a quick shout out at the start of this video. There is a champion chase tournament starting tomorrow. It is a ×2 Ancients. However, if you have been smart like me, you would have not created any of these epics so far if you have been doing the fusion, which means all of the events kind of start this weekend for the final 4 rares that you need. At a minimum, you should be able to get 750 points, instantly tomorrow. That's 750 champion chase points because it's 250 points per epic. If we look on the fusion calendar, we can see all of the events that we need to finish the fusion start either on Friday, which is tomorrow, or Saturday. Now, Saturday, we got a Dungeon Divers. That pairs nicely with Spiders. So you kind of want to wait tomorrow, start your Spider on Saturday, double dip. Got another Artifact Enhancement event. They've been around about 2,800 points. They're a bit high, but whatnot. And obviously we need the rare from Champion Chase. So hopefully, if you are smart, if you are sort of efficient, in this one champion training window, you should be able to get 1,500 points on a champion chase because you'll get 250 per epic and then 500 points for Marinix. You can't save Marinix for a more optimal time. There's no clan versus clan next week. Champion chases this weekend. You can't store it up and wait. It'll expire by the time we actually have another window to open it. So you might as well get that 500 points in this champion chase. And hopefully there's a legendary book still at the sort of the 2,500, 3,000 mark that you can get as a reward. So that's just a little shout out there if you are going for the fusion. If you're not going for the fusion, pick up a free epic if you've got some of the rares. That's still 250 points towards, the champion chase if you do want to get to that legendary book. But the main purpose for this video today is to look at something that I think has been a bit of an issue. 2 things really. One, the information coming out of Plarium, which is not accurate, not specifically detailed enough, and doesn't really give you clarity on things that you are asking questions for. And also error-ridden mistakes that clearly aren't correct. We're going to look at both of those situations today, and we're going to look mainly at the FAQ that was released yesterday. So let's talk about the first kind of confusing thing that's come out of Plarium recently. The Mighty Uko passive, when we first had the initial description, didn't have all the context that we've had now since we've had playtesting. We've had about 2 different text change explanations from Plarium, and I've done a bit of an explanation on it as well. So we had this in the Raid Digest, where they were basically trying to explain why the passive wasn't working how everyone thought it was going to work. They haven't really explained this very well in this statement here. So they go, as you know, Uko's passive skill grants a 50% chance of stealing 1 random buff from a random enemy each time they receive a buff. Any stolen buff becomes protected. It means that whenever an enemy places a buff on their allies, there's a 50% chance for Uko to steal that buff from a random receiver of the buff. Thus, the accuracy resistance check will occur between Uko and the random enemy. So far, that's okay. What they're basically saying is, if a champion gets buffed, the check is on the champion that's getting the buff, not the one that's putting the buff out there. That was a bit of a confusing thing. Please note, Uko is sneaky enough to steal both buffs that have been placed earlier and the buffs placed at the moment. The text translation here is pretty bad. What they're basically trying to say, any buff that's on the target. But what they're not clarifying is, okay, can he steal a protected buff? Can he steal this? Can he do that? What they basically should be saying here is Uko can steal any existing or new buff so long as it's not protected. So it can steal that stone skin, but that stone skin is a 50% chance as well. So it's like 25% chance. So in short, 1 buff is 1 check, regardless of the number of opponents with this buff in the enemy team. If the enemy places more than 1 buff, Uko attempts to steal each of them. What does that mean? Does it mean that he does it 3 times? Does it mean he does it once? It's not clear enough there. So clarity is kind of important. So that was the first attempt. And then they've obviously updated the text now within the game to be even different to what they've described in the Raid Digest. So we've got like 3 different explanations of how this works. So that's kind of the first kind of example of where things are not actually being reported correctly. Another example of an error here now is a video that came out on their official YouTube channel, Raid 101 Buffs and Debuffs Breakdown Part 1. This is good. This is actually what they should be doing on their YouTube channel. This is what us content creators try to do on a regular basis. But for a lot of new players, which they obviously have been pushing lately, it's important that people understand the core mechanics of how debuffs work and how buffs work, which can be a little bit overwhelming now that we've got so many different effects in the game. You know, when we first started the game 2 or 3 years ago, it was very much just like your standard increased defense, decreased defense. Now we've got veils, strengthen, we've got bombs in more different variations, we've got hex, we've got individual boss buffs and debuffs, we've got protection modes, we've got loads of different things now that have completely complicated this model. So if you're a new player coming into this game, it's a mess. In the first kind of week or two, you really have no idea what's going on. And as content creators, we do our best, but we don't always succeed. So Raid having kind of an official video that explains it in a sort of a basic fundamental is a great idea. I applaud it. The only problem is it's not accurate or detailed enough. This is a complete error. It's not even correct. We can argue about like definitions, translations, localizations, language, different way of explaining things, but the core information here is wrong. The debuff is not 30%, it's 25%. They also don't explain the difference between these two buffs and debuffs. The buff is additive, the debuff is multiplicative, and that is a significant difference. What this basically means is if I put this on my champion, I get 30% crit damage. I don't multiply my critical damage by 30%, I get an additional 30%. So if I had 200%, I've now got 230%. The debuff, they changed it about 6 months ago, 12 months ago, because it was utterly useless, to be multiplicative, which means instead of it reducing the enemy's crit damage by 25%, it actually multiplies the enemy's critical damage by minus 25%. So effectively, instead of it being 200 minus 25% would be 175, it's 200 multiplied by minus 25%, which it actually comes out as 150%. So it's twice the strength of the buff, effectively, and which is why they actually changed it from 30% to minus 25%. Now, the audio on this video also says minus 30%. So this has passed through development into marketing, marketing into the sort of the voiceover actor, into actually the video editors. Nobody has picked this up in Plarium, and this is kind of like a basic fundamental error. You're going to be telling people this on a video, and if I as a content creator put this out, I would get slaughtered by my community, my viewers, for being inaccurate. So there needs to be more credibility and put to this and kind of say, look, you know, you're doing an official video. You need to be ensuring that your content is accurate. You can mistranslate it, like the Mighty Uko passive, I can forgive because it's complicated to explain. So trying to explain it in a simple manner can be difficult. But simple errors like this is unacceptable in my opinion. We can even go into the game guide itself, go into FAQ here, going to list debuffs, I think it is. There we go. Look at the list buffs and debuffs. Scroll down and we can see even in their online help articles, it says minus 25%. As I said in that video, they also don't go into enough detail explaining the difference between additive buffs, such as increased crit rate, increased crit damage, versus multiplicative debuffs and buffs, such as increased attack, increased defense, and increased accuracy. These things are important for players to understand so they understand the value of buffs and debuffs. We're at this position now where we've had like 2 instances in the last few months where, you know, the information coming out of Plarium is not in a good, detailed, and accurate manner, and it's causing confusion amongst the community. And then we get what we had yesterday, which is an FAQ on the Awakenings. So Hellhades did a video covering this yesterday, and to be honest, he got most of the points right. However, a lot of people were messaging me going, oh, does this mean this? And does this mean that? And I think there was a bit of confusion about what he was trying to explain on the Iron Twins passive as well. So what I want to do here is I want to actually cover this off and explain how some things don't work like you would think. Specifically Polymorph and Sniper, specifically a couple of other things. And I also want to point out some of the things they've actually totally forgot to mention in here as well. So first thing, core mechanics. Debuffs applied via blessings can't be resisted and don't require accuracy, which makes them very powerful. This is correct. This is accurate. If you do a debuff on a blessing, it can't be resisted and it doesn't require accuracy. I would add debuffs and instant effects are different. And that is an important thing to note here. They're talking about debuffs. The only debuff that you actually place via a blessing is Brimstone. You can place the fear by a Soul Reap, and Polymorph is also placed as a debuff. However, that's conditioned on an instant effect, which isn't a debuff. Instants and debuffs are different. It's like comparing decreased defense versus Warlords put all your skills on cooldown. That put all your skills on cooldown is an instant effect. So that needed some clarity in my opinion, but it's okay. They are right in saying that any effect that you do with a blessing doesn't require accuracy, and any effect that you need to resist, you can't, it can't be resisted. So if I put Brimstone out there, I can put it on a 0 accuracy champion and it will apply it regardless of the enemy that I'm facing. Blocking a champion's active skills or passive skills doesn't prevent blessings from being activated. Again, this is correct. Block active skills and block passive skills blocks the champion skills. The champion doesn't have a blessing skill. They have a blessing. The blessings themselves have skills, but that isn't associated with the champion's object. So when that debuff happens, it looks at the champion and goes, okay, champion's got skill A, B, C, D, E, A1, A2, A3. We put those on cooldown, but the blessing sits in a different container and the skill then sits differently to that. So that's why that doesn't happen. That makes sense. Now to probably the most contentious point here. Neither artifacts nor masteries affect blessings. Correct. With the exception of Sniper Mastery. Correct to some extent. Now, a lot of people have sent me a message and gone, okay, does Polymorph have an increased chance on Sniper and Fearsome Presence? Which you would assume it does because Polymorph places a debuff. It's wrong. It doesn't affect it. And I have even heard that some people have been told directly from community managers and developers it does work, but I cannot see why that is possible looking at how the game works and how I understand the game to be working in the back end. And we're going to look at that now, basically. I'm going to give you an instruction of how the game would process Polymorph to show how there's no possible way that Sniper or Fearsome Presence could be affecting it. Okay, so the first thing you need to understand about the way skills work, every champion has skills. Every effect in the game is connected to a skill in some form. So whenever you do something to a champion, whether you deal damage, place a buff, place a debuff, do an instant effect, change the duration, any kind of battle scenario is an effect. It has to have an effect to work. So when we look here on this screen, this is kind of like how an effect would look in the back-end static code, what we use to analyze things like multipliers, cooldowns, how the conditions work, how various different things work. So you can see this is Sniper, 5% chance to activate a debuff, except for the control debuffs from a skills or artifact set bonus. That's the sort of localization. It's not the actual one in game because it changes. They've got two different object containers, but that's roughly what it does. And we can see here it has an effect, kind ID 7003. The kind ID is important because each individual type of effect has its own kind of unique identifier. Placing a debuff is 5,000. Placing a buff is 4,000. Dealing damage is 6,000. They are specifically coded for specific things. Then we've got targeting. You know, these are all sort of translated to like single target, AoE, targets with highest turn meter, lowest turn meter, highest health, lowest health, all the different conditions we have, they are all coded to the target type here. But the important thing we need to look at here is the relation. Relation is how it connects effects together. It either connects it to a skill needing to activate this effect, or it needs to be different types. So what this is basically saying is in order for this to activate, firstly, we have to pass a condition. So that condition is basically saying it can't be a control effect of any kind here, and it must be further along the line here. If I zoom out a little bit and zoom across, we can see it basically says the relation can't be an ally, the relation chance has to be greater than 0, the relation chance can't be 100%, and the relation has to be on the producer of the effect has to be the one. So it's basically saying it has to be the champion placing the debuff with this mastery, and the chance can't be guaranteed, and the chance has to be greater than 0. That's how this works. And then it'll basically take the chance and it will do the formula to increase it by 5%. Has to pass that condition first. Once it passes that condition, then it goes, okay, well, what can it actually apply to? And it can only affect kind IDs 5,000. The phase is when it happens in a battle. That's not so important here. That's a bit more complicated to explain. The important thing that I want you to take away from this bit is 5,000. It can only work on kind IDs, so effects which are a kind ID of 5,000. If it's 4,000, which is place a buff, this doesn't work. Obviously, it's about placing debuffs. It has to work on debuffs. So that's the first thing here. And now for Fearsome Presence, just to clarify, we can see 5% chance to activate on stun, sleep, freeze, provoke. Control ones, obviously, I think petrification might work in here as well. Again, we can see it's 7,003. It affects 5,000 only. And we can see down the bottom here, it's basically saying, instead of it now being no control effects. Now it has to be a control effect with the same kind of chance here. So in order for these two effects to work, it has to be a 5000 type and it has to be the right conditions. If that passes, then we do add in 5% onto the chance. So how do blessings work? Well, blessings basically are a separate object completely. As I mentioned when I talked about block active skills, it's not connected as a skill to a champion. It's a blessing. It's a different object. Every blessing has an ID. The blessings have a rarity, a divinity, as we know. And then the grade bonuses will either have some sort of stat gain. Stat gain here is translated into the different various stats, speed, HP, defense, or it has a skill. And we can see here that Polymorph has the same skill at all levels. We have 600, 200. So that then goes and looks in the skill array objects. It's kind of a relationship link. You know, I want to go and look up 600, 200 from the skills. And those skills will then have effects. So you can see the effect of this is the first effect in that array 6002, 001. First effect is a kind ID 9050, not 5000. That's important to note. And what does this do? Well, again, we have conditions. So this is basically saying if the owner's double ascend level, which is awaken, is 1 or 2, and the owner's related effect, all these different conditions, and then it has to basically go, have you applied a debuff? Yes or no? Or did you steal a buff? Yes or no? And you haven't already been transformed into a sheep. Obviously, otherwise it'll break the game. So what it's doing here is it's doing the check, the chance to do this here. It's checking first, do you qualify to transform the sheep? If you do, we then roll the chance. This number here is translated, so it'll be, I think, 5% at rank 1. This is the 5% one. And then what happens, 9050 is like what Hydra heads go through. They don't kill an enemy, they don't defeat an enemy, they transform the enemy into a variant. And you can see this down the bottom here, variant ID. So what it actually does is it converts your hero into a different type of hero, rather than it defeating your hero. That's how the Hydra heads work. That's why things like upon death mechanics don't work in Hydra, because you haven't killed the head, you've changed the variant of it. Once you've done this check, then we go through the last phase, which is to place the debuff. Now in this one, we've basically got 600205, so it's an effect that exists within the skill for the blessing, but it is not the first thing that happens because the effects will go in order. And if you notice here, it's got a relation effect type ID 6002001. So in order for this effect to fire, it has to have passed that first effect. It's connected. It goes 01 into 05 if 01 was successful. But if you notice here, this is the 5000. This is where Sniper would activate, but we haven't got a chance because the calculated odds is done at the variant transformation stage, not the placing the debuff. So it will go, place a debuff. Does it work? Yes or no? If so, 20% chance at 6-star awakening to convert them into a variant. If that happens, convert them, then place a debuff. There is no opportunity for you to improve the chance of placing the debuff because the debuff happens all the time. It always happens if you transform. And we've just confirmed before, Sniper itself cannot affect anything other than place debuffs. So in this instance, Polymorph is not affected by Fearsome Presence or Sniper, despite what you may have had confirmed. Now, if Plarium want to come out and explain this in more detail, they can do, but from my understanding of the way the game code works, the reason why Sniper doesn't work for things like Warlords A3, for things like any chance to do instant effects like removing a buff, those things are different coded effects. They are not place debuffs. It works for toxic sets because a toxic set is effectively just place a debuff. It's not an instant effect. Whereas things like a chance to put skills on cooldown, a chance to steal a buff, a chance to increase or decrease debuff durations, all of those are instant effects. Sniper has no impact on those, and it would be the same thing here for Polymorph. So based on that, what does Sniper actually affect? Well, I had a look through all the blessings, and there is only one blessing that Sniper improves, and that is Brimstone. Brimstone is the only blessing that directly places a debuff on the skill as an effect. All the other things, such as the clearing the control debuffs, the other things, Heaven Cast, all of those are either instant effects or on yourself. They're not actually placing a debuff. The only other thing that does happen is Fearsome Presence with a 5-star Soul Reap will have a 5% extra chance to place a fear because it's 50% at 5 and then 100% at 6-star. Once you get to the High Awakening, you would probably wonder, does Sniper even have an impact at all? So I think that's another example there of we really should be clarifying this on this document. We should be saying, with the exception of Sniper Mastery improving the odds of Brimstone and Fearsome Presence improving the odds of 5-star Soul Reap, because there is no other effect. You're almost making a point to the community, hey, Sniper really works on blessings, but it's only for one of the 24. So therefore, you're not really giving much information and you're causing more confusion. So that's an important thing there. Hope that makes sense. I just wanted to, I know it's a bit nerdy, but I wanted to give you the detailed understanding of why Polymorph doesn't get affected by Sniper, despite what you're being told. So other things here, Phantom Touch. Champions have a chance of inflicting bonus damage with every hit of the multi-hit skill. Cool, we're clarifying it's per hit, not per attack. Bonus damage inflicted by this blessing counts as an extra hit against a finite shield. Yes, it does, although I have heard some people saying it's bugged where sometimes it will do less. So if you're using the lore with Phantom Touch, I've heard some people say it only takes 2, not 4. I don't really know why. I haven't tested it in enough detail myself. I need to do that. But from my understanding is anything that is a hit is basically a hit against the shield. This would also be the same for the Wrath counter as well. So there is pros and cons to this. Bonus damage inflicted by this blessing against bosses is not affected by the passive skill that reduces maximum damage based on the target's max HP. Correct, because it's based on attack. So I don't really know why we need the whole sentence here. We can literally just say damage base is based on your champion's attack. Therefore, there is no enemy max HP bosses. The other thing they haven't mentioned here is the ignore defense. There is nowhere in the front end of this explanation, codes, details that actually says Phantom Touch ignores 30% of the target's defense, and that's actually quite big. You'd only know that because I've kind of data mined it out of the static data to read that. Intimidating Presence, this is good to explain because I think people are getting confused that it's additive. It is multiplicative, so it's whatever the aura is multiplied by the value of the blessing at the awakening grade you have got. So it's good that they've clarified that. This blessing will take effect as long as it's on team. This is a good way of explaining it. Any champion on the team can have it. If the leader dies, you still get the benefits, and it's multiplicative. Perfect. Cruelty Blessing. I had some people get confused about this, but I think that's just because they kind of skim read it. It's a lot of words. If multiple champions with this blessing attack the same target, each of them will decrease the target's defense. Yes. However, they can't go above the cap determined by their awakening level. So if you have 2 champions, one with cruelty level 1 and the other one with cruelty level 6, the first champion's attacks won't decrease the target's defense after the combined effort removes 10% of the target's defense, but the second champion will be able to decrease the target by another 30% until it reaches 40%. We forgot to clarify that bosses is half of this. So I had some people going, oh, does that mean I can do 2 times 20%? I was like, no, champions are 40%, bosses are 20%. They have kind of explained it correctly, but they just missed that point so that people, again, were looking at this and going, cruelty stacks. I'm like, no, it doesn't. Cruelty gain stacks only up to the maximum star level you have on that team, and that champion can only go to their maximum star level. This blessing does not affect weak hits. Fine. Finite's defense cannot be decreased to his shield. Fine. Those things are pretty minor, to be honest, because the Finite's shield is already reducing damage by quite a lot. That's all they need to add here is basically a fourth point to say cruelty does not stack across champions. It can only go up to the maximum of the maximum awakened champion. And then last but not least, this caused a bit of confusion from Hellhades' video. I wanted to just clarify what he was explaining. Retaliatory launch activates whenever the twins' HP drops 2 or below the value set in the skill description, no matter what kind of damage. Poison, HP burn makes that happen. Well, that's wrong already because we know Geomancer's passive doesn't activate it. So that's the first thing. What Hellhades was saying is if the damage is activated by the debuff, the damage still goes through. Whereas if you activate it via direct damage, it will cleanse everything. I think that's what he was trying to explain yesterday. It was confusing a few people. Let me be clear about how this works. He's got the same type of passive as Ice Golem, but there are different effects that are compatible. A bit like how we were saying Sniper only affects 5,000. Ice Golem is only activated by direct damage effects. So that would be that 6,000 number I was talking about. Iron Twins, however, can be activated by direct damage, poison debuffs, HP burn, or brimstone. But it cannot be activated through Reflect or Geomancer's additional chance to hit passive, which is a type of reflect. So when we talk about reflect damage effects, not every single reflect mechanic as described is the same coded reflect. Brogni's passive is coded as 6000, so Brogni's passive will activate this. However, someone like Snicktrack's reflect or reflect buff itself is coded differently again. That won't be affected by this. So you can use Snicktrack's passive, you can use reflect debuff to do damage back to the boss, but if you use a Brogni passive, that will activate his passive. So again, direct damage, anyone who hits him, anyone who does poison debuff damage, that also counts. Any HP burn debuff as well, that also counts. And then the smite debuff from Brimstone Blessing also activates it. So that brings me to the end of the video. Obviously, I don't want this to be a negative too much towards Plarium. My point I'm trying to make is when they make statements officially, they need to be taking extra precaution, more so than us content creators, because obviously not every player will necessarily follow our channels, but more people might be following the official channels. They need to be making sure the information they're giving out is correct and less confusing. They don't want to add more confusion to the mix. And it feels like lately, they're kind of, whether or not it's a mistranslation between the developers and the marketing and the community managers teams, they're not really helping people understand the game better. They're making it more confusing. They're adding more ambiguity into the mix. I hope the deep dive into the code wasn't too confusing or too complicated for you, but these are the nuances that you wouldn't see in the description in game that I can see from looking at the game code to understand it in greater detail, and it does have a significant impact as to whether or not you make that decision. I have heard people choosing Sniper Mastery on Duchess because they have Polymorph. It doesn't work, and then she doesn't do any debuffs, so Sniper is a completely wasted mastery on that champion. So it is important that this information is put out there so people make the right decisions when they're playing the game. I didn't mean to go on for so long. I wanted to do a quicker video than this, but I guess we got into the detail a little bit too much. If you do like these videos and you are a fan of this channel, please give it a subscribe. We do want to keep growing the channel and keep pushing good content out for you. We had a bit of a rough September, but we're back to doing daily videos. You can also catch me on live streams. I will probably be live streaming tonight. We might be playing a little bit of Lord of the Rings online, talking about tomorrow's finale of Rings of Power. If you are a bit of a Tolkien buff, come and hang out. But until then, I will catch you either tonight or in the next video.